Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of CUTS International, let me welcome you to this webinar on gender dimensions of informal trade. We have an excellent panel today representing 4 countries, BBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. Since April this year, uh, since we first got locked down and then things became challenging, we have been organizing one webinar after another. And while this is fun as well as challenging, but the important thing is that we have been able to continue with our work, continue with our agenda, and including we have learned a number of new things like attending webinars, organizing webinars, and things like that. So since April, we have organized about 50 webinars, if I can recall. I mean, CUTS as a whole. And this is the last of the series this year. So of course, 2020 was very, very challenging. And we hope that 2021 will be much better. And not just 2021, the rest of this decade of 20s. So we know that 1920s, it was a roaring decade. And though I'm not going into any comparison, but I still hope that the decade of 2020s would be much better than what it was started with. So on that note, I'll be very brief about the topic which we are going to discuss today, gender dimensions of informal trade. There are a number of reasons why women are more engaged in informal trade in our part of the world, in Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal, this sub-region. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. One is that there is a demand-supply mismatch in the local economies, coupled with challenging, I would say, trade procedures, and also that the volume is very less. So these are some major reasons, or one set of reasons, why informal trade is very much prevalent in this part of the world. In all, if we look at the Bangladesh-India border, or India-Nepal, or India-Bhutan border, we can see informal trade, and border hut is one example where we see that informal trade is getting semi-formalized. And if I go into the details of the kind of products which are being traded in border huts, we see that we can vouch for the demand-supply mismatch theory and why informal trade is there, flourishing in some localities. The second reason is that it's not so much in India-Bhutan border, but definitely in India-Bangladesh border areas and India-Nepal border areas, that the feminization of the local economy is more or less complete. The landholding is very, very small, so one cannot sustain their household with such a small landholding. It's subsistence agriculture, to put it simply. Secondly, there is large-scale migration of men folks out of those areas. Philippines in particular. Though remittance is a significant source of their household income, but that is not enough. So what we have seen that as compared to other parts of the world, it is the women who are more engaged in informal cross-border trade in this sub-region, and that is supplementing their household income other than addressing the demand-supply mismatch issues. So I'm just highlighting these two major reasons for why women are so much engaged in informal cross-border trade in our part. This is part of a work that we are doing under the Asia Regional Trade and Connectivity Program of which is supported by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom, formerly DFID. And we hope to continue this work to get into the details of why and what kind of border practices, good practices, which we can devise so as to encourage people for more cross-border trade, at the same time taking into account their household needs and other social and economic needs. So, with that note, as I said, we have an excellent panel today. Let me first request Dr. Kamala Gurung, who is a Gender and Natural Resource Management Specialist in ICIMOD in Kathmandu, uh, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. We are partnering with ICIMOD in similar work in that number of transboundary landscapes in the Himalayan region. And we have found that Kamalaji is a great supporter of this kind of work. So Kamalaji, I understand that you are going to make a presentation in about 12 to 15 minutes. So over to you, Kamalaji. Yes, Kamalaji, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Bipul once again. Giving an overview of the today's webinar, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much, Kutz, for having me as one of the speakers for today's webinar. Well, my presentation will be more on the explaining or highlighting more what drives women across the South Asia or HKH, Hindu Kush Himalayas, women particularly engaging in informal, not only informal, as Bipulji highlighted, very much small scale cross-border trade. But this study is, more on the exploratory, based on the existing literature, but which also gives the sort of field-based, the challenges, in a way, barriers that women face in the context of, informal cross-border trade. With this, I hope you will enjoy the presentation along with some of the picture which I have putting here in the presentation. Well, I cannot move my presentation actually. Oh, yes, finally. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's very clear.
Yes, thank you. Before going to the main topic, I would like to set up some context in the case of cross-border trade. Actually, cross-border trade is not very new. It has been there historical, as we all know about it. Perhaps you might have heard about the Silk Road across the region in HKH, in also South Asia. But it has actually changes over the past period of time. The scales, it was within the country, between the country and the regions, and also the products. Perhaps the demand has been changes across the South Asia. So things was there, but it has changed the skills and products. I just quoted, found out very interesting, the numbers. The World Bank 2012 published that the cross-border trade increase in South Asia, which used to be 16% in 1993, and now it had increased dramatically 41% of the GDP. This gives the clear picture that the demand or the momentum has gained about the cross-border trade. But interestingly, the cross-border trade was there historically, and also the practitioner policymakers have not really emphasized the gender issues. They overlook, though the cross-border trade cuts across the ages, religion, and ethnic groups, and also gender. But now the research suggests, I remember one time Bipulji mentioned that now it has gained the momentum of highlighting, emphasizing the gender issues. And that's why we call trade is not a gender neutral. And now I think it's a great that even the donor also giving an emphasis that to look into the gender issues within the trade and also in the cross-border trade. As I said, the women are morely engaged in informal sector. Within that very small scale, between the the people G highlighted that within the between the Nepal and India border, between the India and then Bangladesh, and even the Bhutan. So between the Myanmar and China. So it exists. But what happened is that that the border practice, both formal and informal, exist. But there's no doubt about that majority of women engaged in the informal sector. But one thing, perhaps, courts are more knowledgeable on this, that informal trade is not really a illegal trade. It's not recorded officially by the custom of each border. For instance, a great example in the South Asia is the Hats, as earlier Bipulji highlighted, and also Melas. We have a weekly market within the country. That's a great example, which the women entrepreneur used to trade or sell their the products. So I think this is the great best practices which has been there from century, and which we need to capitalize to encourage, to promote our women across the South Asia. So one thing, why the women in South Asia are engaged or venture more in the informal sector, and one of the I think the approach that we use, the motivational approach, particularly looking at why the individual person are motivated or interested or attracted to engage in the informal sector, or why they are not interested in the formal sector. So this is the sort of approach that we use for research study. My presentation will focus very much individual women perspective, for this analysis. So if you look at in the pool, the pull factors. The pull factors mean that attracts the individual person, particularly women, why they are interested in the informal sector. On the other hand, why they are not, or they are less interested in the formal sector. What's the the interesting, and it's not very much surprising that they are very much interested engaging in the informal sector on a small scale is because of low financial requirement. No need to invest so much, and also they can do from home, and then it doesn't need the high level education or certificate. So the interesting part here, the why women are interested in the informal sector, is that they want to be independent financially. That's a very good example, as Bipulji highlighted, that also supplements their household expenses. Or, that's a very good, the statement that woman wants to be engaged in the informal sector. On the other hand, the push factor, why they are not or they are less attracted, is that because of their, not access to the land and property, because this land and property is equally important for investing their business or their enterprises. The other thing is because of the restriction of the women mobility, and then that actually hamper for their education and skills. Um, this is the social cultural norms that we do have in South Asia, is the customary laws, which very much favor of man, or on the other hand, it's a constraint women's inheritance property rights. I just want to give an example. Sometimes, I work with a very much scientist, hardcore science people. They don't really understand why these social cultural beliefs still the problem, because they don't, they don't really link off in the science and the social cultural. So I wanted to give this, the sequence of, why it's important, why these social cultural beliefs still the factors of that hamper women to move forward. So for example, here I'm just giving an example in the context of informal and small scale trade that women engage still, is because the root causes is the social cultural beliefs and norms that still exist. Because of that, that affects the restriction of women mobility, inequalities in access to family resources, particularly daughters. And there is also the customary laws that is still, giving a more priority to man rather than female or woman. What is the consequences then? That consequences is access to information. Since you are not moving, because of the restriction of mobility, that has actually limited access to information, going to the market. And also because of the inheritance property rights is unequal, then means that at the end, that will have a limited or lack of access to loan and credit. And also at the end is lack of access to education. And that impact, which is remains that the women still engaged in the informal sector. So this gives us sort of, the pathway that, yes, at the end is the root causes is the social culture. I'm just linking of why our women in South Asia or HK region remains in the informal and small scale trade. Majority of women. So the conclusion and way forward is that yes, is that there is a restriction, but in the meantime, our government has actually reformed the land policy, which are very much gender inclusive. Very much. If you look at even the Quran, it's a very gender woman inclusive. Compared to our Hindu. But what happened is that there is no, it's a lack of proper implementation approach mechanism in the ground practice. Whether it's a government, whether it's a religion, the forms. So the way forward is that I think we all, we like CUTS, ICIMOD, USAID, has to sensitize these changes, land reform to the government, particularly the local government. For instance, I will give a very great example. We have a fantastic land reform, tax exemption from our government, but our local government, administration, and women entrepreneur, they don't know this such kind of reform the inclusiveness of the land reform that government has introduced. So I think we need to go through or take this, the policy strategy to the local level. And we all need to work together. I think that will be my message at the end. And with this, and thank you very much for having me for today's webinar. Over to you, Bipulji.
Thank you, Kamala ji, for this excellent presentation. You have set the tone of our webinar today. I'm just going to highlight a couple of points from your presentation. One is that the structure which you have presented, push factor, pull factor, and then this sequence, or if I may call it, the theory of change diagram. Well, we are aware that, rather we are getting more and more aware that trade is not gender neutral. This kind of a structural approach is very, very helpful in taking forward this agenda. The second issue which I would like to highlight from your presentation is that you have rightly pointed out that while reform measures are there, but the institutional mechanisms at the local level for their implementation is still very much missing. And it is also, one may say this, the same thing for various government initiatives. Well, the initiatives, schemes, etc., they are there, but those who are on the ground, for whom the so-called beneficiaries, they are not much aware of them. So these are the two major takeaways that I'm taking from your presentation. And going forward, I would request the other panelists to put their thoughts on these two particular takeaways. And of course, the other thoughts which can help us to generate more and more knowledge on this subject. So on that note, let me now request Mrs. Nasreen Begum, who is a member law of Bangladesh Competition Commission, and also a keen observer and expert on trade and gender issues. So over to you, Mrs. Begum, for your thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, sure.
In about 10-15 minutes. Thank you.
Around 12 to 13 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. And how are you?
Good.
Because now we are in the end of 2020.
Good.
And you have mentioned that this is the last webinar for the cards in this project work. Thank you. So it's an absolute pleasure to be a part of today's webinar on a vital topic, that is the gender dimensions of informal trade. Let us start by recognizing the positive trends. Bangladesh has attained steady progress in gender equality in recent years. Some of this progress is owed to policy interventions by the government of Bangladesh. Many of these policies in recent years address the practical and strategic needs of women entrepreneurs. It is worth highlighting a few of these that pertain to today's discussion. The National Digital Commerce Policy from 2018 provides support for training and capacity building for women entrepreneurs, with support for both internal and external trade. The industry policy from 2016 allows female SME entrepreneurs to avail of collateral-free loan up to certain limits and special concessions such as lower interest loans for business loans for such entrepreneurs. The SME policy of Bangladesh Bank, our central bank, has created a dedicated desk at all banks and financial institutions for women entrepreneurs. The SME policy of the Ministry of Industry provides concessions and preferences for women entrepreneurs where it is deemed appropriate. The tax policy provides preferential tax-free limits for female entrepreneurs. The National Women Development Policy from 2011 represents the government's overall commitment to women through a gender-responsive budget allocation. These are all useful policy interventions, but we must also recognize that there is much work to do. The question naturally arises of whether the intervention of policymakers is based on a full picture, taking into account challenges both on account of gender in general, but also those particular to the informal sector. After all, a majority of women entrepreneurs are in the informal sector. We must admit there are gaps in these policy interventions. The informal sector is unregulated and mostly undocumented. And as might be expected, that is often lesser accountability. As a result, both the contributions and challenges faced by entrepreneurs in the formal sector in general and women entrepreneurs in particular in the informal sector are often underappreciated. Informal trade takes place because the transaction costs of trading formally are higher than those incurred in informal trading due to costly and quite complex trade procedures involved in formal trade. If we look at the trade through the formal land customs stations or LCS, for example, at the Indo-Bangladesh border, which provide transit, customs and immigrations and cargo handling services for goods and passengers. The border clearance processes are overly bureaucratic and complex and impose barriers to trade for illiterate or semi-literate entrepreneurs from the informal sector. However, even if the complexities around lack of documentation could be ameliorated, women entrepreneurs face particular challenges as the customs station are often not set up with the environment that is sensitive to the social needs of women. Most border agents are men and have not been trained to work in a gender-sensitive manner. Additionally, the environment in these stations can often leave women traders, many of whom are divorcees or widows, feeling vulnerable. As a result, women entrepreneurs are not necessarily able to reap the benefits of reforms to border management. As a result of such barriers, cross-border trade shifts to informal channels. Typically, informal cross-border trade takes place through 1. Informal markets along the border, 2. Carries using formal channels, and 3. Unguarded points along the long and porous border. All of these avenues for informal trade present vulnerabilities for women entrepreneurs in our current socio-economic environment. Getting products to market is difficult as it is where the transportation infrastructure is creaky. As
You have some connectivity issues.
please.
Yeah. Yes, it's fine now.
One minute, please. As with the land customs stations where transportation modes are dominated by men and do not take into account the needs and vulnerabilities of women. Women entrepreneurs again face highlighted barriers. Additionally, small-scale entrepreneurs do not enjoy economics of scale and pay more for accessing the transportation infrastructure for logistics, especially where their activities are located in less developed regions. Women entrepreneurs in the informal sector thus face dual hurdles. Likewise, access to capital is particularly challenging where loan disbursement decisions are centralized in the major cities. One of the most profound gaps is due to the vagueness in decision-making process. Although official policy may provide for preferential treatment for women entrepreneurs, much is left to the interpretation of the relevant officials involved. In the case of access to preferential lending facilities, for example, if the officer does not find that there is a sufficient collateral or documentation, loans could be rejected. Women entrepreneurs in the informal sector may find that they are unable to access the benefits of the relevant policy interventions because of the way that the policies are interpreted. It is clear then that the policy interventions must be sensitive to the fact that women entrepreneurs mostly operate in the informal sector. There is need to develop a legally binding mechanism for prior consultation with the relevant stakeholders, including women entrepreneurs from the informal sector, to design appropriate policy interventions, including amendments and enhancements to the existing legal instruments that were mentioned earlier. Not only must policymakers display greater sensitivity, but the relevant officials at the front lines of implementation must also be trained to display greater awareness of the challenges that women entrepreneurs in the informal sector face. For example, custom officials should be trained and held accountable. Do not operate in a way that will make women entrepreneurs feel vulnerable or harassed. Similarly, credit officers implementing preferential loan programs for women should be trained in a way that recognize the borrowers are more likely to come from the informal sector. Loan disbursement requirements should not be structured to favor to the formal sector if they are to be truly effective. In addition to greater awareness and training among policymakers and those implementing policy, we should also recognize the importance of representation. For example, increasing the number of women customs officers will allow border management process to be designed in ways that are more sensitive to social considerations that pertain to women in the local context. Similarly, it can be expected that women entrepreneurs would feel more comfortable approaching women loan officers, but such representation can only be possible if there are sustained efforts to recruit women and if maternity leave and other benefits are structured and streamlined to address the needs of women officers. The presence of tax incentives can be helpful, although the informal sector is largely untaxed. Lower tax rates for women entrepreneurs may reduce some of those barriers to shifting to the formal sector. Lower VAT rates for goods consumed and produced by women and may also be helpful. Women entrepreneurs should also be benefited from gender access to training, capacity building, and increased collaboration among themselves. Only with equal opportunities for both genders can Bangladesh strive in achieve prosperity and achieve the promise of Bangladesh constitution, that is the Constitution of Bangladesh, Article 22 of the Constitution for equal rights for women with men in all spheres of the state and public life. And also Article 28.4 provide ample room for policy interventions to be made in favor of women or any backward section of the population. Thanks a lot. And also thanks for Cards to give me the chance to, as a speaker, to say something about this big issue in this context. My one request to Kalalam that she also explained and also highly appreciated their land reforms policy and also the local administration policy where women are getting their benefits. So can I just ask or can I take any document from your side regarding these land reform issues where the females or the women entrepreneurs are getting help from your country? That will be helpful for me and also the others. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll request Dr. Gurung to send us any relevant document to us in that regard, and we're going to circulate that not just among this group but also the larger group of our work on gender and trade. So thank you very much, Mrs. Begum, for placing your thoughts on this subject. Again, I would take a couple of points from your presentation.
Sure.
One is that indeed Bangladesh has done a lot of good things on gender equality, and all of us should learn from that. The role of the civil society, NGOs, is to be recognized in that respect.
Yeah.
And secondly, thank you once again for outlining a kind of a positive agenda for further encouraging women entrepreneurs. I know I've been visiting Bangladesh for more than 20 years now. And I'll also tell you a story that I've always found that women entrepreneurs and women workers, they are very much active even at that point of time, and their activeness has improved over time. And this is one thing which I keep saying since I visited Bangladesh in the second half of in 90s, that it is because of the women workers, particularly in the garment sector, and also women entrepreneurs. The fundamentalist forces will never ever come to power in Bangladesh. And that is a very, very positive thing. And let me also acknowledge, since this is the month of December, Vijayar Mas, let me acknowledge the courageous, exemplary role played by the women in Bangladesh Liberation War.
Yeah, thank you.
That is, unfortunately, that is not as documented as it should have been. Now, some positive developments for the documentation of the role that
But
women,
it's a history.
common
But
women,
it's a history. Yeah.
yeah, that has just started taking place, and we'll get to know more. So, on that note, let me now come to Mrs. Damchae Dem. She's the founder of Bhutan Association of Women Entrepreneurs, and for a long time she has been associated with our work in Bhutan and also in this region. So, Mrs. Dem, I know that you have huge experience of working with women entrepreneurs, getting them together. So, after hearing Mrs. Gurung and Mrs. Begum, so what are your thoughts on these gender dimensions of trade, not just informal trade, but gender dimensions of trade? And I would expand that to more to gender aspects of entrepreneurship. So how do you see that? Of course, over time, we have overcome a lot of challenges, but going forward, there are a number of challenges remain. And one of them is this participation of women in our labor force. You know that in these countries, the labor force participation of women is still very low. In India, it is very, very low. It's just about 25%. So what should we do? I mean, formally or informally, in order to increase women labor force participation and encourage women entrepreneurs for entrepreneurship development as well as for cross-border trade. So what do you, Mrs. Dem? In about 10 to 15 minutes, Let's hear your thoughts.
Kuzampo, to all the fellow panelists, and a warm welcome to all the audience, though we can't see any of y'all, but I'm sure, and I do hope there will be many like-minded people here in the audience today.
Yes, indeed.
And thank you, Katz, for inviting me. And Mr. Bipul, I just wanted to take on what you said about my experience in the field. You know better than anyone else that my work is usually, is working with the grassroots. And I do believe that if trade is to be inclusive, then we need to get, this group, this very important group, as part of any discussions or talks that we have going forward. So I'm going to read out my what I've written here, and I don't have any pictures like Kamala. She's made such lovely presentation, and so have all the other panelists before me. And since everything that is to be covered for the gender dimension of trade has been covered, and because Bhutan is no different from anybody else in as far as our aspirations are concerned, I will go right down to what I feel is important, and that is getting to the roots. Okay. So all of us have worked tirelessly, putting in so much effort these past few years in our different fields. Mine being empowering women and girls, identifying hidden entrepreneurs through Bawi. It is extremely painful and disappointing to see it dashed by an invisible enemy, COVID. Who could imagine mankind would be scrambling for survival with successive countries being gauged by how near to normal our citizens live? Bhutan has fared better than most, with zero COVID-related deaths and no local transmissions, the latest being a 25-year-old woman. How deadly is this virus that within a few hours of our close contacts tested positive? Needless to say, the swift action taken by the health team, who not only identified but tested and isolated the infected, shows our level of committed to the world at large. This just didn't happen by itself. As soon as the reality of this dreaded pandemic became known globally, prayers were offered by the monk body, led by His Holiness the Jikembo, government agencies led by Honorable Prime Minister, volunteers including the DESUP's armed forces, youth groups, and private sector, with His Majesty at the helm, took immediate action to anchor and safeguard our people. What is heart-wrenching is so many sacrifices made by ordinary citizens because we believed and wanted to become self-sufficient, proud members of the global community. We live in one of the most climatically challenged places on Earth. Our receding glaciers reminding us of a fate far worse than this global pandemic. The true irony is we worked so hard to get to where we were pre-COVID. And as His Majesty said, and I do believe, my dear friends here, that I don't think COVID has been given the importance it has to be given, because COVID is deciding everything in life today, including trade. And I'm surprised that this has not been mentioned. We in Bhutan are challenged both with human and economic resources. All our hard work and sacrifices seemingly gone down the drain as farmers who are our backbone scramble to make ends meet. Those in urban areas who eked out a living running small shops or selling by the roadsides are even worse off, as unlike farmers who live off the land, they have to pay rent and other utilities. I'm really disturbed, dear friends. I'm really disturbed. Because, His Majesty in his speech during the National Assembly mentioned that the bigger countries, the ones who have got a bigger population, who are, well off, who are, have got, the big countries will not feel the impact of COVID as much as a small country like ours. This is the reason why, and I will beg for the audience to please bear with me, that we need to give importance. Because whatever we may strive for or we may work for, whatever sacrifices have been made down the line is just going to get washed off. Anyway, my talk is not going to be on the COVID only. It is going to be about the impact of COVID on the trade and in the lives of women. So please do bear with me. Okay. No one can say they are untouched by this cruel pandemic. Due to tourism literally grinding to a halt, all associated groups who depended directly or indirectly have been adversely impacted. Industries losing workers, supply chains and markets managed to keep their units running at skeletal pace and were perhaps the most quick to adapt to the pandemic by plugging gaps using innovative methods. Once again, we cannot thank His Majesty enough for his wisdom, compassion, and courage, steering us out of an impossible devastation that could have resulted in total chaos of our small, fragile country. The financial institutions under Honorable Governor of Central Bank rose to the occasion by deferring loans and waiving off interest for large and small borrowers alike. This injected the much needed confidence to our flagging economy. And like people caught in a storm, we are simply treading water, hoping and waiting for the storm to dissipate. I have always been proud of my country, then being the only carbon negative country on earth, and could add perhaps amongst the few countries with no COVID-related deaths nor local transmissions. My country introduced happiness as a crucial pillar in the global development paradigm. We practiced sustainable living long before it gained traction in global corridors. All this for what? When we realize how vulnerable we are, this COVID derailed, adding to the challenges of our people who through sheer hard work and sacrifice had carved out an exemplary home of happiness for its people. My team has just returned from a month-long tour of the country, meeting rural farmers, taking stock of how they have been impacted by COVID. And this is funded by ADA. Some of the challenges faced were farmers could no longer expect shared labor, which is the practice within communities. As the lockdown required, they be confined to their farms. No help, therefore, resulted in farms lying unattended, unharvested. But our resilient farmers still didn't give up. They worked harder and longer hours trying to harvest their crops. Those that grew traditional food grains simply stored their harvest, while those that had ventured into cash crops were the hardest hit, with no market linkages, no value-add facilities, etc. No tourists meant one of their biggest sources of income was hit. Small quantities of produce that made their way to urban markets were exorbitantly priced and beyond the purchasing capability of urbanites. The case of a watermelon farmer from Tashigang is a stark example of what happened. A call was made to Thimphu by a farmer who thought she was being cheated by her client, who paid new 30 for a watermelon and sold it in Thimphu for 180. She didn't realize her buyer resold it down the road for new 50 and then on changing hands at least 4 times before it reached Thimphu. If we had the network in place, it would have reached from farm to table for about Nultrim 80 per piece. For the community, for the audience, I beg for you to bring your thoughts to ground zero. Trade for us begins at the grassroots. And this is where I work. So please bear with me. I am of the opinion that there is a solution to every problem. Our work in 7 districts under the SHINE project, funded by EU Switch Asia, has given us a golden opportunity to put into practice our plans for creating a prototype that can be expanded further. It is imperative we build circular economies within zones, establishing small processing centers, business hubs, where produce can be value-added and made consumer-friendly. This will not only ensure economic activity, but provide gainful employment to youth. This activity is extremely important because the fear of farmers losing their spirit and hope, resulting in them leaving their farms fallow and simply joining the huge groups of rural migrants, further straining urban centers. These are not normal times, and getting by, doing the best we can, has become the survival mantra for most. Some of the doable mechanisms that I have, sort of noted here, that could, catapult us, so to say, from being grassroots rural farmers into the traders that we so want to join. We so want to join this group of, trades related women groups. We also would like to join. But what we need and what we have to do is that we have to make this inclusive if it is to mean anything to any of us. So we would like to think of having digitized warehouses, microprocessing centers, creating enabling environment, including employment generation within villages, cold storage facilities, quality test and accreditation units, enabling market access to consumers in niche markets who truly appreciate quality and are willing to pay for it. Here I'm reaching out to global markets, people who appreciate, and are willing to pay for quality food. And here I would like to take this opportunity to thank, my friends in SADF, in Alip, and of course, mostly to the Government of India institutions such as NIFTIM and NIPA for their help testing our products. Right now, they are helping us, testing our products, because before we can, make things ready for global consumers, we have to make sure that we meet the standards, their standards. And I think that is something that we are working on here. Well, drawing to the end of my not a presentation, but my thoughts, sharing my thoughts. For us in Bhutan, we must be mindful of progress while maintaining our zero carbon footprint. We are walking an extremely fine line with economic development on one end and our fragile environment on the other. Therefore, it is imperative we recognize our strengths and weaknesses, making informed choices to suit our needs through making sustainable, smart, and sharp decisions that will ensure the happiness and well-being of our future generations going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Dame. Let me first of all congratulate you and the people of Bhutan for your zero or carbon neutral
carbon negative,
initiatives.
Sir, we are
carbon negative initiative. Yeah. So as we go along, we know that now the climate agenda is changing from climate change to climate ambitions, and being climate neutral, Bhutan is showing us a way forward that how local economies can be managed in a better manner. Secondly, I'm glad that you have emphasized on about the impact of COVID on small and marginal entrepreneurs in Bhutan, particularly women entrepreneurs, and how, rather why, we should also look at these challenges and convert them to opportunities through better and more inclusive trade. You have listed down a number of points for that to happen, and I'm sure that government of Bhutan, along with various other governments, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, including, and also our uh, development partners such as the United States, Germany, Israel, we are going to work together to keep this balance in mind. By keeping this balance in mind, the balance between economic development, equality or equity among various sections of the society, and with environmental balance. which Bhutan is already doing. And there are a lot of lessons that we can learn. Let me also mention the very good initiative that government of Bhutan and government of Bangladesh they have taken together. You know that Bhutan is a landlocked country, and the easiest way for Bhutanese product to reach outside market is through Bangladesh. So that connectivity is also operational now. You would also be happy to know that as part of this work, we are looking at the impact of COVID on women entrepreneurs, particularly small, micro, small, marginal women entrepreneurs in this sub-region, including northeast of India. And we have just completed our field work in Bhutan. Our partners, they have completed it. We have a very good partner there, as in other countries. And many of the things which you have highlighted, they got reflected in our data from the field. The important point which you have mentioned again and again, that not just for you, for everybody, trade has to start at the grassroots, not at the customs level or just at the policy level. So that is something which we have to keep in mind. So with that, on that note, let me now request Hasina for her thoughts. She is the founder and managing director of Impulse Social Enterprises in Shillong. She is based in Shillong in Meghalaya, which is one of the states in Northeast India, a beautiful state. And Hasina has been working with a number of micro and small women entrepreneurs. In fact, she has got them together into an organization which is Impulse Social Enterprises. Now, after hearing all these speakers from Nepal, from Bangladesh, from Bhutan, Hasina, it would be great to hear your thoughts, not just on the challenges which are being faced by women entrepreneurs in Meghalaya and in adjoining states in Northeast India, not just on the impact of COVID on those entrepreneurs, but also on how you are looking at these challenges which have been emanated from COVID and turning them. What are your thoughts on turning them into opportunities? Over to you, Hasina, in about 10-15 minutes.
Thank you, Bipul, Chatterjee. And it's been wonderful to be meeting virtually with all the other speakers who have been part of the CUTS International and the initiative that we've been doing on research. I know we are supposed to all meet together, but unfortunately, here we are on a virtual space. Before we get into the question, Vipul, that you've already put up, I just would like to first start with the opening of what I had mentioned on the research document for CUTS, the paper. India has invested almost $3 billion over the last 15 years to support state government to empower poor rural women through self-help group. These projects have supported 45 million poor women access skill, market, and business development services. Some of them have become successful entrepreneurs and inspiration for others. Now, taking it from a scheme point of view of what the government has done from the lens of Government of India, I want to go deep back into the ground reality where our earlier speaker have also highlighted is going through border huts. Border huts has been emphasized in the last few years. And I think your earlier research report, Ground Information, has highlighted that the Northeast, sharing international borders, especially with Bangladesh, which is the longest border hut has been an emphasis to encourage women entrepreneurs, but most of them has been very much in the informal trade. Now, taking that during the lockdown and COVID, the informal trade could not function the way it used to function. So that indeed has brought down the local economy and the trade participation of women at the grassroots to zero, because there has been no emphasis on how that could be tackled. And most of these women are women who have much or less not participated in the formal trade per se, where technology could play a vital role for them, or where they would connect the supply chain to a different format. So that is something that if we have to look post-COVID, if this continue for a longer time, the government will really need to relook how border huts will operate, how women participation in the border huts can also tackle the issue of COVID, tackle the issue of social distancing while enhancing economic livelihood for them. So this is something which I really want to highlight, having work on the ground, especially with women. The other factor is that the previous findings, the previous research at multiple level, and my ground participation at all the border point, the border huts has not till today women friendly in terms of infrastructure. So if we have to look at the ground level of women participation, we need to make these infrastructure possible for women. I think the last time we all met in Kathmandu, the same conversation, I think Nasreen Appa will also agree, we discussed the same issue, that India-Bangladesh trade, if the informal trade has to be from a gender, then infrastructure has to be created. Simple infrastructure such as toilet facilities, resting facilities, where women needs those small access. That's some basic part if we're talking about informal trade. The second part is the informal trade when it comes to women from the 8 states of the Northeast with our neighboring country, either Bhutan or, we're looking at Myanmar. I know this talk today does not really cover Myanmar, but having worked in Myanmar for the last 12 years, we see that the Moreh border as well has a similar trend of the border participation of the informal trade by women. Infrastructure is a cut across all these border points that the government policy has not addressed till date. Policy has been created, but it has never looked at it from the lens of equity, from the lens of having these support services that make their participation much more conducive for trade. The other factor that I want to bring forward is that if you look at from the Northeast perspective of women in the informal trade, indeed we have the highest of them. But they have just been a channel of bringing product from Southeast Asia people to the Northeast. So when I use the word bring products from the Southeast Asia, whether we're talking about fashion product, household product, interior product, so they mean like they're more like a channel. And these channel has also been participated by women entrepreneurs from the Northeast in taking forward to other parts of India, of all the clothes line, all the fashion line, all the infrastructure material, interior product, and so on. But no, support services to enhance local economy has been looked into it, because the Northeast is also very rich with agriculture, very rich with their biodiversity. That part, if you go back to our earlier speaker, I think this the whole concept about climate change, biodiversity, looking at carbon, issue, then they need to have a balance of that. And COVID situation have seen very much that the women has more resilience, but we need to also encourage more food security under the local trade, so that the people living across the border will actually, even in the situation of supply chain breakup of the technology, there's a food security that will be an enhancement of this trade that can continue, because that's an important part from two aspects: the lens of gender, the lens of food security, the lens of biodiversity, the lens of local economy enhancement. So this is never being looked. I think let's just look at the Harshvardhan today, the policy that was spoken yesterday on the 19th emphasized so much about foreign policy. But foreign policy is inadequate without looking into informal trade, which is highly participated by women. So we need to really see that convergence of these policy or review of existing policy, within the framework of foreign trade, within the framework of women entrepreneurship within our country, our neighboring country, the BBIN countries, will really need to really look to have a better dialogue. Because without a better dialogue, these initiatives of foreign trade are actually being implemented in isolation. So even if in the last 7 years of the work at multiple levels, not just from a social entrepreneur, that look at social impact business for women in the Northeast, working with neighboring country, we have not been able to address simple basic infrastructure for women in the informal trade. So unless until we make that happen on the ground, how do we really look the next level of emphasizing women participation and their economy? The second part is that there has always been this gap that women have not moved from an informal trade, because to a formal trade when it comes to, export with our neighboring country. It has been more men-centric. It's because of paperwork. Too much of paperwork and documentation has shown that there has not been any kind of hub that was being spoken for many years, that creating documentation hub at the border to improve proper documentation processes to encourage women from informal trade to go into the formal trade. That itself has never been taken into a larger dialogue, a larger implementation level. So there has been this mismatch of schemes that is being given to women, but does not look into their participation that will encourage formal trade to the, informal trade to the formal trade. If we have to see women in terms of leadership role in the entrepreneurship space, then these has to be tackled. These has to be discussed much more widely. So these are certain aspect which is ground reality. No doubt, the strength of women in the informal trade has been a backbone of how their participation in the local economies, in their strengthening their families, earning their income, cannot be denied. It is very, very strong indeed, but we cannot isolate their participation in taking them to formal, bringing them to the space of dialogue where they play a vital role. So that is my experiences on the ground, experiencing through implementation of Impulse Social Enterprise itself, and also the dialogue, and also being a researcher, at different level and analyzing these aspects. Government at one end would discuss foreign policy, but will never talk informal trade, dimension. When we know that our neighboring countries that we are discussing today function more on informal trade. We talk about border huts, but we don't talk about infrastructure that is required to be taken forward to make informal trade for women more inclusive, as we are talking about inclusivity. So inclusivity cannot come where you say, here we are doing a trade, and then we dismiss the fact of infrastructure needs. Then we are talking about the reality today that all of us, I think our previous speaker from Bhutan as well, spoke very much about how COVID and how the country has responded to COVID. But now with the reopening, the factor about which product will be actually available in the informal trade, whether we're going to talk about agriculture product, which is the need of the hour, food is the need of the hour. If that is the case, then we also have to see how we emphasize growth, right? Participation of women farmers, land rights issues have to be taken into consideration. If you look at the dimension of the Northeast, we have to look into customary laws and the land rights issues. If you're looking even at in the context of Nepal, the same situation comes into account, customary laws and their emphasis. If you're looking at Indo-Nepal, Kakarvita, for instance, is one of the biggest informal trade that has women from the 8 states of the Northeast participating very much in acquiring a channel of bringing these products to the Northeast itself. And we are consumer for Southeast Asia products. And these are women entrepreneurs who are the channel for it. But we have not created a plan that will actually help them improve their participation, improve their contribution, improve in taking them to the next level. With that, Vipul, I think we can open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I open the floor for discussion, you can also put down your thoughts in the chat box, questions, observations, or comments. I'm glad, Hasina, that you have brought this Southeast Asian dimension to this discussion. We have been hearing that as part of our Neighborhood First, as well as Act East, that Manipur, particularly, is the state which is the link between India, South Asia, BBIN, and Southeast Asia. In theory, yes. At the same time, we keep hearing that the market is not there, the connectivity is not there, and therefore it is difficult to do trade. But it is interesting to note from your presentation in particular that Southeast Asian products are coming to Northeast in a big way. So if connectivity was not there, then how is that possible? That's the natural question which would come to my mind. It is right now, it is coming informal way. So we need to look at how we can institutionalize some of these enabling factors which can help us to do more and more formal trade with Southeast Asian countries. I'm also glad that you have mentioned two very, very important points. One is that we cannot really talk about foreign policy by not looking at it from the point of view or angle of both formal and informal trade. This is something which our foreign secretary has spoken about the day before. Not in that very clearly, I would say, but this is there, I know, in MES or Foreign Ministry's agenda. And we are definitely going to take forward this message to our Foreign Ministry and to our Donor Ministry, Department of Northeast Region, and going forward. And secondly, I think informal trade is a very, very important factor behind food security in this region, in the whole of Northeast and adjoining areas. And that is something which we need to recognize. So in today's webinar, I think we have got a lot of food for thought, which will help us. For example, you gave the example of border huts. How can we make the infrastructure there more women friendly? This we have been talking about. Some improvements have taken place. Much more improvement is required. So sometimes I see this disconnect between the capital cities and the local areas. And our role is to bridge that disconnect as much as possible. So with that, let me now open the floor, and including to other speakers. If you have any questions or clarification from other speakers, you are welcome to place them or ask them. Or otherwise, you can also raise your hand to ask questions. The only thing is that time is limited. We have about 15 minutes for this question and answer. Anybody would like to kick off? Any questions? Or are we too fatigued? And the year is coming to an end, so I don't know whether there is going to be any question for today's webinar. I think it was very good. in the sense that some of the things which we have found on the ground, they got, we could test them, I mean, from your presentations. And we have also received a lot of ideas, food for thought, for taking forward this agenda. I think my colleague Veena, you have any question?
No, actually, Nasreen ma'am is speaking. I think she is muted.
Unmute her.
Already unmuted.
Okay. Yes, Mrs. Nasreen, we can hear you. Yes. And there are some connectivity issues as well. Ravana, are you still there? Would you like to say something? If you want.
Should I say something, Bipul? I mean,
Yes,
if
please.
I just
Yes,
join
please.
in. I think post-COVID, we really need to also emphasize that foreign policy takes, biodiversity, agroforestry into account. If we have to really look it from the lens of gender participation, as we keep talking about, but for me, I would say gender equity is much of high value in terms of policy and real implementation, that we cannot look at the Northeast just as a recipient of product coming from Southeast Asia in terms of the formal and informal trade, but we rather could also be the hotspot for biodiversity, food security to our neighboring countries, because that's the richness that we should emphasize. I think if you're looking back at all the four multiple research that has already been reported, I think it's time for the government to have dialogue on them, to really look at the findings that is already there from the ground, rather than asking for opening of more border huts. I'm quite surprised with the fact that the the states in the Northeast is asking for more border huts with Bangladesh, but they have not really resolved in terms of uh, requirement for needs of informal trade and women participation. Do we still need more border huts at the moment, or do we really need to strengthen the existing border huts? I
I think
visited the maximum of the border huts. The emphasis of strengthening has not come into consideration in many of the meetings, whether we are talking at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I participated, before COVID. And I think right now they have more responsibility to look into it.
I think
And
we
then,
need both.
yeah.
Yeah, there is a demand-driven agenda, and we have been doing a lot of field work on the ground. And every time we are seeing that people are demanding. But at the same time, you were right that we have to have good infrastructure in place. I mean, I'm not talking about huge infrastructure. We're talking about basic infrastructure which is women friendly. Uh, for example, lighting, toilets, water facilities, and things like that. Now, there is a question from our friend Jyotiraj Patra from Oxfam, Cambodia. His question is, in terms of addressing the infrastructure deficit in the border areas, are there any example of impact investment or from the private sector? So there is another question which is very important from Saurabh Malhotra, that it is very important to look at the Eastern Himalayan greater region or greater Himalayan region in the eastern part as one transboundary region and plan sustainably in the value chains of biodiversity and trade. Important, absolutely, it is important. And then there is a question from Ramona Al Hamzwai from USAID, New Delhi mission, that while emerging from COVID, what would be the one key activity to undertake as recommended by each of the panelists? So let me take this first and start with Hasina. That what would be that one key activity that you'd like to undertake by yourself or your organization, state government, central government, other bodies, uh, in order to mitigate the impact of COVID and also to convert challenge into opportunity. So let's begin with you, Hasina.
Yeah, thank you, Vipul. I think for me, mitigating climate change and mitigating foreign trade relationship with our neighboring countries would mean that we address unsafe migration, we address the inbound migration to participate in local economy. With that, I believe very strongly that co-creation is a way where we emphasize, innovation that can help to mitigate the situation. And I think that goes back to what Saurav has asked. But since Saurav is working very closely with us, people in the co-creation in the Eastern Himalayan, and has been working to put things together on the ground as we are opening up. I think, Saurav, if I may ask you to come on board and just maybe throw your light on why this co-creation is so critical, because we are all in the Eastern Himalayan belt, all our other speakers as well, it'll be great.
Yeah, so can we unmute him, Keval?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thank you, Hasina, for getting me on board, and thanks for unmuting and letting me speak. I just like to throw some light on the fact that, so if we look at the greater Eastern Himalayan region, and that is the area in focus in this webinar, this region has been a hotspot of not only biological diversity but also cultural diversity, and a lot of trade, both legal and illegal, across borders happening, and a lot of this trade has negative impacts on the region. What we've seen through a lot of our work is that it is actually the environment and degradation in the environment which is leading to unsafe migration, and the fact that it is the degradation of the environment which is leading to a reduction in farm-based livelihoods, a reduction in agricultural outputs, and thereby forcing people to migrate out from their home zones and migrate unsafely to areas, and also forcing illegal trade through zones, which is which has its own set of problems. What we're trying to do through this co-creation partnership is a focus on restoration, transboundary, with a particular focus on the border regions, because if you look at deforestation data, a lot of the border regions, especially the India-Myanmar border zones, India-Bangladesh border zones, India-Nepal border zones, India-Bhutan border zones also in the last many, many years, are some of the most highly degraded forests in the region. And it is from these areas that a lot of unsafe migration springs. So through this co-creation, we think that by tackling the environmental lens, by recreating forests, by actually revamping and enhancing farm outputs through agroforestry, by bringing biodiversity back, that you not only enhance people's livelihoods, you generate sustainability in food chains, which we've seen has been a massive help during COVID. A lot
Thank
of
you. Yeah.
the ground people have been able to go through stuff on COVID. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So so
Okay. Thank you.
looking at the environment in
Thank
this.
you, Saurabh. Thank you.
Thank you
So
very
going
much.
forward, as we further strengthen our partnership with ICIMOD and other organizations, this is definitely which is something which we are going to work on, including in partnership with Impulse. So let's hear from Mrs. Dame or Mrs. Gurung and Mrs. Begum about.
Can I jump in?
Yes,
People,
please.
thank you. My actually the statement will align with what Hasina ji mentioned and what USAID mission colleague is asking. COVID-19, one action point, and what Hasina ji pointed out, that because of COVID-19, the Hard Bazaar is not working as used to be before.
Yeah.
I think for the USAID colleague who mentioned that what will be the action point after the COVID-19, looking at the women and trade, I would just like to highlight CULTS International at the moment, carrying out study across the 10 countries with the collaboration of ICIMOD. So first of all, let's wait from this study. Let's wait from this study what action we'll recommend. And then I would like to also look into what Hasina ji pointed out, the challenges the women, women are facing it in ground reality. So these two will come from this study. I'm hoping of that. Having said that, based on my 15 years experience of in working in the entrepreneurship development, I think the collective action will be one of the way of bringing women together, particularly in rural areas. There is ICT, we're talking, fintech is coming up, but let's see how our women are there. Illiterate, very informal education. It takes sometimes to teach them this ICT. Definitely, it's a encouraging tool, platform that we can introduce. But at the moment, we need to also think about the building a capacity in this coming the platform or the innovation. Over to you, Bipulji. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is absolutely necessary. I mean, there are some good examples also. I want to give one example. Himalayan weavers, they are based in Uttarakhand, Pithoragarh and those areas. And they are doing wonderful work. So the importance of organizing is very, very much there. So unless we get organized, women entrepreneurs here we are talking about, they get organized and we have to help them to get organized. Things are unlikely to improve. So on that note, any final thought, Mr. Dame or?
Yes, I am waiting for the opportunity to talk. And if I may get the screen, can I have the screen? Can I have the full screen, please? I would like to have the full screen. How do we get the whole screen? I'm in a small. Can you all see me? I mean,
yes, we can see you.
Okay, great. Well, seems like Christmas is right around the corner, and there's somebody out there who wants to know what would be the wish if you had one. And there are so many wishes, but then the wishes that I think some of the things we can take care of ourselves, especially since we already do have help from Switch Asia, EU Switch Asia, and other projects in line. So I think if there is Father Christmas, Father Santa Claus out there, we would like to have a digitized warehouse. That would help us a lot. So, good. In one sentence, wish list from Bhutan is a digitized warehouse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, definitely we are going to take it forward.
Yeah.
This idea. Mrs. Begum, any final thought from your side?
I think she's Nasreen Appa, you're muted.
Kindly unmute yourself.
So you unmute her.
It's okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Can hear you.
Yeah. So by this time we have heard that there is a term legality and the illegal trade, and the border hard like this. So if we say that the illegal, it will not be appropriate. We can say that it will be irregular or customary. So for that reason, if we want to acknowledge the informal trade by the women entrepreneurs, so how it can be legalized by own customary laws or legal instruments. For that reason, I would like to mention that through study during these BBIN countries and the partners here where we are working, that all the customary law relating to this area can be analysis, and one report for gap analysis report, and with then such recommendations what should be done. And that on the basis of that report, each country can improve, enhance, and update their customary law. That is my suggestion
Thank
or
you.
recommendation.
Thank
Thank you very much.
you. We have received a very good suggestion from Mrs. Sheila Vide, how to make women entrepreneurs export ready. And she has mentioned some joint initiative, including testing, leveling, as per the requirements of importing countries, packaging of products, and also said that they have been working with specialized institutes like Institute of Packaging. So definitely going forward, I would request my colleagues to be in touch with Dr. Vide and see that how this model is working on the ground, what lessons which we can draw, and how to take forward those lessons to other countries in our neighborhood. So on that positive note, let me call it a day. I mean, at least for this webinar. I thank all of you for your very active participation. We have learned a lot, including how we are mitigating COVID impact on women entrepreneurs. That's very, very important. As I said before, that we are doing field work, which is including impact of COVID on women entrepreneurs, and we're going to come out with a brief report on that, hopefully by February. And I'm sure that that report is going to give us a lot of food for thought on this important subject, which straddles many areas, including foreign policy, environment policy, and of course, economic policies. So on that note, let me thank all of you once again and close this meeting. I wish you a Merry Christmas in advance and very Happy New Year. And I'm sure that 2021 will be much happier than 2020, though we are starting with a very low base of 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.